The sun rises over Oakwood Estates, catching the edges of not one, not two, but 50 miniature American flags, each dancing in the morning breeze. They line my walkway, border my garden beds, and stand at perfect attention around my front yard. My neighbors can't stop staring. Some laugh, some shake their heads. My HOA board president looks like he's about to have an aneurysm. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Michael Collins. I'm a retired Army veteran, a father of two, and until 3 months ago, I was just another homeowner trying to mind my business in this pristine suburban paradise. I'm not someone who goes looking for trouble. I follow rules. I keep my lawn at exactly 2.5 inches as specified in Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our homeowner's covenant. I never leave my trash cans out past 7 p.m. on collection day. I even got written approval for the shade of eggshell white I used to repaint my mailbox last spring. But there are some things worth standing up for. When I first moved to Oakwood Estates, I was impressed by the immaculate landscaping, the consistent architectural aesthetics, and property values that only seemed to go up. The HOA fees were steep, but they appeared justified by the community's appearance. A small price to pay for perfection, the realtor had said with a rehearsed smile. I believed her. What I didn't realize was that I was stepping into a world where conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced with the zealous precision of a military inspection. Only instead of a drill sergeant, we had Donna Kessler, HOA president for the past 7 years running, whose folder of violation notices was rumored to be thicker than the community bylaws themselves. "We maintain standards here," she told me during our first meeting, her eyes scanning my property as if already looking for infractions. That's why people move to Oakwood. For a while, I was happy to play along, but everything changed on Memorial Day when I decided to honor my fallen brothers and sisters the way I always had, by raising the American flag. And that's when I learned that in Oakwood Estates, patriotism had a very specific set of guidelines, a maximum height requirement, and apparently needed prior written approval in triplicate. What happened next taught me a lot about community politics, the surprising flexibility of HOA bylaws, and just how many 12-inch American flags you can fit in a standard suburban front yard. This is the story of how I took on the HOA and found a way to follow every single rule while making my point impossible to miss. I suppose to understand why I reacted the way I did, you need to know a bit more about me. I served 22 years in the Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. The flag isn't just a piece of cloth to me, it's a symbol of everything I fought for, everything my friends died for. My grandfather was at Normandy. My father served in Vietnam. We're a military family going back generations. Growing up, the flag was raised every morning and lowered every evening with proper ceremony in our front yard. It wasn't political, it was just part of who we were. After I retired from service, my wife Sarah and I decided it was time to settle down somewhere peaceful, somewhere with good schools for our kids, Abby and James. They'd moved enough times in their young lives, following my assignments from base to base. They deserved stability. We found Oakwood Estates during an open house weekend. The development had everything: a community pool, walking trails, a small playground. The houses were beautiful, not McMansions, but solid, well-built homes with character. The kind of neighborhood where kids ride bikes until sunset and neighbors bring you casseroles when you're sick. Sarah fell in love with the bay windows in the living room. James spotted the basketball hoop in the driveway next door and immediately made friends with the neighbor's son. Abby liked that her new high school was just a 10-minute walk away. It felt right. The day we moved in, 3 different neighbors brought welcome baskets. Mrs. Chen from across the street baked homemade cookies. The Patels next door offered to help unpack. Even Donna Kessler, before I knew who she was, stopped by with a bottle of wine and the HOA welcome packet, a 3-ring binder that I would later learn contained 127 pages of community guidelines, architectural standards, and landscaping requirements. "Just a few things to help maintain our community standards," she'd said, placing the binder on our kitchen counter with a thud that should have been my first warning. But I was too busy feeling like we'd finally found home. That night, as Sarah and I sat on our new back porch watching the sunset, I told her, "This is it. This is where we plant our flag." I had no idea how prophetic and complicated those words would become. Memorial Day was approaching, and it would be our first in the new house. I always make a point of honoring the holiday properly. It's not about barbecues for me, it's about remembrance. 2 weeks before the holiday, I ordered a new 5x8 American flag, larger than my old one, but appropriate for the size of our property. I also invested in a 20-foot aluminum flagpole, properly anchored in concrete, positioned in what I considered the perfect spot. Visible from the street but not ostentatious, catching the morning light just right. I spent an entire Saturday installing it. Did all the digging myself, mixed the concrete by hand, made sure it was perfectly level. Sarah brought me lemonade while I worked. James helped hold things steady. Abby researched proper flag etiquette online and reminded me about the right proportions and height. It was a family project. "What do you think?" I asked Sarah when it was finally up. "It's beautiful," she said. "It feels like we're really home now." The Johnsons from 2 doors down walked by while we were admiring our handiwork. Mark Johnson stopped, nodded approvingly, and told me he'd served in the Navy himself. We chatted for a while about our service, our families, our new community. His wife mentioned that their son was considering enlisting after graduation. It felt good, like we were connecting with our new community through this symbol that meant so much to me. The flag wasn't just decoration, it was a conversation starter, a point of connection, a small but significant way of sharing something about myself with my neighbors. Over the next few days, several neighbors commented positively. The retired couple across the street mentioned how the flag looked especially beautiful at sunset. A jogger who passed by regularly gave me a thumbs up. Even the mailman, a Vietnam veteran himself, stopped to chat about it. Not once did it occur to me that this simple act of patriotism might be against any rules. The flag was well maintained, properly lit at night, and displayed with respect. I made sure to follow the flag code to the letter, raising it briskly, lowering it slowly, never letting it touch the ground, taking it down during inclement weather. So when I found the white envelope with the Oakwood Estates letterhead in my mailbox the Friday before Memorial Day, I was confused. Then, as I read the contents, confusion turned to disbelief, which quickly morphed into indignation. "Dear Mr. Collins," the letter began, "it has come to our attention that you have installed a permanent flagpole structure on your property without prior Architectural Review Committee approval, violation of Covenant 7.3.2. Additionally, the display of flags is restricted to house-mounted holders no larger than 3 by 5, violation of Covenant 9.4. You are hereby required to remove the unauthorized structure within 7 days of this notice or face a fine of $50 per day until compliance is achieved." It was signed by Donna Kessler, HOA president, with a copy of the relevant bylaw sections attached. I read it 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. They wanted me to take down the American flag, for Memorial Day weekend no less. I immediately called the number provided at the bottom of the letter. After being transferred twice, I finally got Donna herself on the line. "Mrs. Kessler, this is Michael Collins from 47 Maple Drive. I just received your letter about my flagpole, and there must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Mr. Collins," she replied, with the practiced patience of someone who has these conversations regularly. "All exterior modifications require prior approval, and the covenant clearly states the limitations on flag displays." "But this is the American flag we're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Surely there's an exception for that." "The rules apply to all flags equally, Mr. Collins. We maintain aesthetic neutrality in Oakwood Estates. If we allow one type of display, we'd have to allow all types." "With all due respect, Mrs. Kessler, the American flag isn't just any flag, and I'm a veteran. This feels wrong." There was a pause on the line. "I understand your feelings, Mr. Collins, but rules are rules. Without them, the community aesthetic would deteriorate and property values would follow. You agreed to these covenants when you purchased your home." I took a deep breath. "Can I apply for an exception or retroactive approval?" "You can submit a request to the Architectural Review Committee, but I should warn you that they've consistently denied similar requests in the past, and the committee doesn't meet again until the 3rd Tuesday of next month." After the call, I sat at my kitchen table, fuming. Sarah found me there, the letter still clutched in my hand. "What's wrong?" she asked. I handed her the letter. As she read it, her expression changed from curiosity to confusion to outrage. "They can't do this," she said. "Can they?" "Apparently they can," I replied. "I signed an agreement saying I'd abide by their rules. I just never imagined this would be one of them." That evening, we had a family meeting. I explained the situation to the kids. "So what are you going to do, Dad?" James asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'm not giving up without trying something." The next morning, I knocked on doors. I spoke with neighbors, showed them the letter, asked for their support. Many were sympathetic. Some even seemed outraged on my behalf. But most ended our conversations with some variation of, "That's just how it is here. You don't want to get on Donna's bad side." By Sunday night, it was clear that my options were limited. I could fight and face mounting fines, submit to the process, and wait a month for almost certain rejection, or comply now and figure out my next move later. With Memorial Day just one day away, I made the painful decision to take down the flagpole, for now. But as I carefully folded the flag that evening, using the proper triangular fold technique I'd learned in the service, I knew this wasn't over. The house felt different without the flag. Every time I pulled into the driveway or looked out the front window, my eyes were drawn to the empty spot where it had stood. It was like a phantom limb, something missing that should have been there. That feeling of absence, of something important being taken away, didn't sit well with me. I've never been one to dwell on negative emotions, though. 22 years in the Army teaches you to channel frustration into action, to find solutions rather than fixate on problems. So I did what any good soldier would do when faced with unfamiliar terrain. I studied the enemy's playbook. For 3 consecutive nights after the kids went to bed, I spread the HOA covenant binder across our dining room table. Sarah brought me coffee as I pored over every paragraph, every subsection, every footnote. I highlighted relevant passages, made notes in the margins, and flagged pages with Post-its. "You look like you're planning a military campaign," Sarah commented on the third night, peering over my shoulder at the battlefield of papers. "In a way, I am," I replied, not looking up from Section 9, Exterior Decorative Elements. The rules were comprehensive, detailed, and written in the kind of legalese that seems deliberately designed to exhaust the reader into compliance. But the more I read, the more I began to see the patterns, and more importantly, the gaps. Covenant 9.1.4 restricted flag displays to house-mounted holders no larger than 3x5. Clear enough. Covenant 7.3.2 prohibited permanent structures without approval. Also clear. But here's what was interesting. Covenant 12.8.1 defined decorative garden elements as non-permanent items enhancing landscape aesthetics, not exceeding 24 inches in height, including but not limited to figurines, ornaments, and garden stakes. And Covenant 12.8.2 stated that seasonal decorative elements may be displayed for periods not exceeding 14 consecutive days, limited to recognized national or religious holidays. I read these sections again and again. The wheels were turning. There was no specific prohibition against multiple small flags as garden elements. The not exceeding 24 inches in height restriction would rule out my original flagpole, but what about many smaller flags? I took to the internet, researching HOA flag disputes across the country. I found numerous cases, some that had even gone to court. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 came up repeatedly, a federal law that prevents HOAs from prohibiting residents from displaying the U.S. flag, but still allows for reasonable restrictions on the manner of display. What constituted reasonable was the gray area where battles were fought. And in that gray area, I began to see my opportunity. I also found stories of other homeowners who had found creative ways to work within their HOA restrictions while still making their points. One had planted red, white, and blue flowers in the pattern of the flag. Another had installed special lighting that, when turned on at night, projected the image of a flag onto their garage door. These stories inspired me, but I wanted something more direct, more unmistakable. Something that complied with every letter of the rules while still making my statement impossible to miss. That's when it hit me. If I couldn't have one large flag, perhaps I could have many small ones. If each was under 24 inches and technically a garden element, wouldn't I be in compliance? I grabbed my calculator and started running numbers, measuring the perimeter of our front yard, estimating spacing, calculating quantities. By the time Sarah called me to bed, I had a plan taking shape. A plan that would require a trip to the hardware store, some basic math, and just a touch of what the military calls creative compliance. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and it was completely, technically, within the rules. The first order of business was acquisition of materials. I drove to 3 different stores that day to get everything I needed without raising suspicions. At the first shop, a large home improvement chain, I bought 50 12-inch garden stakes, the kind typically used for plant supports. The cashier didn't bat an eye. At a party supply store across town, I purchased 50 miniature American flags, each approximately 4 inch by 6 inches on a small wooden dowel. The teenage clerk asked if I was planning a parade float. "Something like that," I replied with a smile. My final stop was a craft store where I bought outdoor-grade clear epoxy, waterproof sealant, and measuring tape. By early afternoon, my car trunk was filled with the components of what would soon become my masterpiece of malicious compliance. Back home, I spread everything out on the garage floor and began assembly. Each flag needed to be securely attached to its stake and weatherproofed for outdoor display. It was meticulous work, but I approached it with the same attention to detail I'd applied to equipment maintenance in the Army. Sarah found me there, surrounded by tiny flags, my hands sticky with epoxy. "So this is the big plan?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Phase 1, I replied. "Wait until you see them all installed." "And you're sure this doesn't violate any rules?" I pointed to the open covenant binder on my workbench. Garden elements, not exceeding 24 inches in height. No single element violates any restriction, and the total square footage of all flags combined is still less than my original flag. She shook her head, but she was grinning now. "Michael Collins, you are either the most stubborn or the most brilliant man I've ever met." "I prefer resourceful," I replied, reaching for another flag. It took most of the afternoon to prepare all 50 flags. James helped with the final waterproofing, carefully spraying each assembled flag stake with clear sealant. As we worked, I explained my plan to him in more detail. "So we're following their rules, but still kind of not?" he asked. "We're following every rule to the letter," I corrected him. "That's important. We're just being creative with our interpretation." As the sun began to set, we had 50 perfect miniature flag stations ready for deployment. Now came the precision part of the operation. I'd already mapped out our front yard on graph paper, creating a perfect grid for placement. Each flag would be exactly 36 inches from its neighbors, creating a uniform pattern across the entire yard. The effect would be both orderly, reflecting my military background, and unmistakable. "We'll install them tomorrow," I told James as we cleaned up. "Early, before the neighborhood wakes up." "Like a special ops mission?" he asked eagerly. "Exactly like that," I agreed, amused by his enthusiasm. "Operation Stars and Stripes." That night, I could hardly sleep. I kept visualizing how it would look, anticipating reactions, mentally rehearsing my defense if confronted. By 5 a.m., I was wide awake and ready to execute the plan. James, surprisingly, was just as eager to get started. We ate a quick breakfast and headed out front with our supplies. 50 flag assemblies, a tape measure, garden gloves, and a rubber mallet for pushing the stakes firmly into the ground. Working methodically, we started at the property line closest to the street and moved inward, measuring carefully to maintain perfect spacing. Each flag stood exactly 23 inches high, 1 inch under the maximum allowed height for garden elements, and was placed with military precision. As the sun rose higher, our project took shape. From a distance, the effect was striking, a sea of red, white, and blue, each small flag catching the breeze individually but creating a collective wave of patriotic color. Up close, it was even more impressive. 50 perfect miniature flags, each one compliant with HOA regulations, together creating something far more noticeable than my original single flag had ever been. By 8 a.m., we were finished. James and I stood at the end of the driveway, admiring our handiwork. "It's awesome, Dad," he said, giving me a high five. I had to agree. It was, indeed, awesome. The morning light illuminated our front yard, now transformed into a miniature Arlington National Cemetery, minus the tombstones, but with the same patriotic dignity. Each little flag stood at attention, creating a rippling wave of stars and stripes that was impossible to ignore. As James and I stood admiring our work, Sarah and Abby joined us, both still in pajamas but lured outside by curiosity. "Oh my God," Abby said, her hand going to her mouth. "You actually did it!" Sarah just stared, then slowly started laughing. "It's spectacular, in the most absurd way possible." "Spectacular was the goal," I acknowledged. "Absurd is just a bonus." The installation had been more challenging than I'd anticipated. The ground was harder in some spots than others, requiring extra effort to ensure each flag was perfectly vertical. We'd encountered an unexpected sprinkler line at one point and had to adjust our grid slightly. But the final result was even better than I'd imagined. From the street, the flags created an undulating carpet of patriotic color. From the front door, they formed perfect rows and columns, like a miniature military formation standing at parade rest. I'd been careful to position them to allow walking paths to the mailbox and driveway, and to leave space around existing landscaping. "How long did this take you?" Sarah asked, walking between the rows, careful not to disturb any flags. "About 3 hours," I replied. "James was a huge help." "I held the measuring tape," he said proudly. "Each one is exactly the same distance apart?" 36 inches on center, I confirmed. Standard military formation spacing, scaled down. Abby was taking pictures with her phone. "This is definitely going on Instagram," she said. "Dad's rebellion against the HOA." "Not rebellion," I corrected her. "Compliance. Very enthusiastic compliance." As we stood there, the Patels' front door opened, and their youngest son came bounding out. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw our yard, his mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. "Mom! Dad! Come look!" he shouted back toward their house. Within minutes, Mr. and Mrs. Patel were also outside, staring at our display with expressions that mixed amusement and concern. "Good morning," I called cheerfully, walking over to the property line to greet them. "This is quite something," Mr. Patel said diplomatically. "Is it for Memorial Day?" "Partly," I replied. "Also partly because the HOA made me take down my regular flag. Apparently these smaller ones comply with all the regulations." Mrs. Patel looked skeptical, but amused. "Donna is going to have a fit." "I followed every rule in the covenant," I assured her. "Each flag is under 24 inches in height. They're all classified as garden elements." "Technically correct is the best kind of correct," Mr. Patel said with a growing smile. "I admire your creativity." As we chatted, more neighbors emerged from their homes for morning walks or to collect newspapers. Each one did a double take as they passed our house. Some stopped to ask questions. Others just stared and moved on. A few gave me thumbs up or quiet words of support. By mid-morning, our front yard had become the neighborhood attraction. Cars slowed as they drove by. People took pictures. One elderly veteran who lived at the end of the block made a special trip to shake my hand. "Never seen anything like it," he said, beaming. 50 stars, 50 flags. Perfect." I hadn't even thought of that connection, the numerical symmetry of 50 flags for 50 stars, but I liked it. It added another layer of meaning to my act of malicious compliance. Around noon, a white sedan pulled up in front of our house and parked. I recognized it immediately as Donna Kessler's car. Sarah noticed too and came to stand beside me on the front steps. "Here we go," she murmured. Donna Kessler emerged from her car with the stiff-backed posture of someone preparing for confrontation. She wore a powder blue pantsuit and carried a leather portfolio. Her official HOA battle gear, I'd come to learn. She stood at the edge of my property for a long moment, surveying the sea of miniature flags, with an expression that shifted from disbelief to calculation to something approaching grudging respect. I decided to take the initiative and walk down to greet her, careful to navigate between the flags without disturbing any. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Kessler," I said pleasantly. "Lovely day, isn't it?" She ignored the small talk. "Mr. Collins, what exactly do you think you're doing?" "Enjoying Memorial Day weekend," I replied, and expressing my patriotism in a manner that's fully compliant with the HOA covenants. She opened her portfolio and withdrew a copy of the rulebook. Section 9.1.4 clearly states, That flag displays are restricted to house-mounted holders no larger than 3 by 5 point, I finished for her. These aren't flags in the sense covered by that section. These are decorative garden elements as defined in Section 12.8.1, non-permanent items enhancing landscape aesthetics, not exceeding 24 inches in height. Her eyes narrowed. It was clear she hadn't expected me to quote the covenant verbatim. Before she could respond, Mark Johnson from 2 doors down approached us. He'd been watching the exchange from his driveway. "I think it looks great, Mike," he said loudly. "Really festive for the holiday." Donna turned to him. "This is clearly an attempt to circumvent the spirit of the rules, Mark." "Maybe so," he replied with a shrug, "but from what I can see, he's following the letter of the rules. And isn't that what you've always said is most important?" By now, a small crowd was gathering. The Patels were watching from their yard. The Chens had come outside supposedly to check their mail, but were lingering to observe. Even Mrs. Abernathy, the retired schoolteacher from across the street who rarely left her house, was standing on her porch. "This creates a precedent," Donna insisted, addressing the growing audience. "If we allow this interpretation, what's next? 50 garden gnomes? 50 pink flamingos?" "I'd pay to see that," someone muttered, triggering scattered laughter. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "I've lived here for 15 years, Donna. I've never once contested an HOA ruling. But I have to say, I think you're overreaching here. It's Memorial Day. These are American flags, not eyesores." "The covenant doesn't distinguish between types of decorations," Donna replied, but I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. "Maybe it should," Mark Johnson said. "Maybe that's the real problem here." The conversation was spreading beyond our immediate group now. Neighbors were talking amongst themselves, some nodding in agreement with Mark, others looking uncertain. Donna seemed to realize she was losing control of the narrative. She turned back to me. "Mr. Collins, I'll be bringing this matter to the full board's attention. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you reconsider this display." "I appreciate your concern," I replied calmly. "But as I said, I'm in full compliance with the covenant as written. If the board determines otherwise, I'll be happy to review their specific objections." With a final tight-lipped look at my flag-filled yard, Donna returned to her car and drove away. As soon as she was gone, several neighbors approached me with congratulations, pats on the back, and even a few high fives. "That was amazing," Mrs. Chen said. "I've never seen Donna speechless before." "Nobody's ever out-legalized the lawyer," Mark Johnson added, referring to Donna's profession. But not everyone was supportive. Mrs. Abernathy shook her head as she passed. "You're just making trouble, young man. This neighborhood worked fine before people started challenging the rules." And the Wilsons from down the street gave me a wide berth, whispering to each other and casting disapproving glances at my yard. By mid-afternoon, our house had become the talk of Oakwood Estates. Parents brought their children by to see the flag garden. Teenagers took selfies with it. An ice cream truck even made an unscheduled stop on our street, the driver telling me it was the biggest crowd he'd seen in this neighborhood. Sarah took it all in stride, offering lemonade to visitors and fielding questions when I needed a break. The kids were enjoying the attention too, James proudly explaining to anyone who would listen how he'd helped install every flag, and Abby documenting the whole thing for social media. "You've started something here," Sarah said quietly as we watched another group of neighbors taking pictures. "I'm not sure what, but it's definitely something." She was right. What had begun as a personal stand against what I saw as an unreasonable restriction had clearly struck a chord. It wasn't just about my right to display the flag anymore. It had become a conversation about the balance between community standards and individual expression, about the difference between the letter and the spirit of rules. By sunset, the crowd had thinned, but the impact of the day lingered. As I turned on the small solar lights I'd installed around the perimeter of our flag display, carefully positioned to illuminate the flags without violating any lighting restrictions, I knew that this was just the beginning. The HOA would respond. The question was how, and whether they would recognize that this had grown beyond one homeowner's grievance into something that touched on deeper feelings within the community. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening, just 2 days after my flag installation. The notice arrived by email to all Oakwood Estates residents, citing urgent matters regarding covenant interpretation and enforcement as the agenda. Sarah looked over my shoulder as I read it. "Subtle," she remarked dryly. "At least they're not making us wait for the regular monthly meeting," I replied. That's something. In the 48 hours between my standoff with Donna and the emergency meeting, the story of my flag garden had spread beyond our neighborhood. Abby's Instagram post had been shared hundreds of times. A local news blog had picked it up, complete with pictures and a quote from me that I didn't remember giving. Someone had even created a Facebook page called Oakwood Flag Guy that already had over 1,000 followers. The attention was unexpected, and to be honest, a little overwhelming. I'd never intended to become a cause célèbre. I just wanted to display my country's flag in my own front yard. The meeting was held in the Oakwood Estates Community Center, a small building near the neighborhood pool that typically hosted yoga classes and children's birthday parties. By the time Sarah and I arrived, the parking lot was full and people were standing along the walls inside. Every chair was taken. Donna Kessler sat at a table at the front with the other 4 HOA board members. She looked composed but tense, shuffling papers and whispering with the board secretary. "Quite a turnout," I murmured to Sarah as we found standing room near the back. "Word gets around," she replied, nodding toward a man with a notebook in the corner. "Is that a reporter?" Before I could answer, Donna called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "As you know, the board rarely calls emergency sessions, but recent events have created a situation that requires immediate attention." She didn't look at me directly, but several heads turned in my direction. Specifically, we need to address a novel interpretation of our covenant that, if left unchallenged, could undermine the aesthetic standards we've all worked to maintain. For the next 10 minutes, Donna laid out the board's position, complete with PowerPoint slides showing relevant sections of the covenant. Her argument was essentially that my display violated the spirit of the rules, even if it might technically comply with the letter of them. The intent of the garden element provision was clearly to allow for tasteful, limited decorative items, she explained, not to create a loophole for large-scale displays that circumvent other restrictions. When she finished, she invited comments from residents. The first few speakers were clearly on the board's side, expressing concerns about slippery slopes and neighborhood character. "If we allow this flag display, what's next?" asked Mrs. Wilson, who had already given me disapproving looks. "Political signs disguised as garden elements? Religious displays? Where does it end?" But then Mark Johnson stood up. "I've lived in Oakwood Estates for 12 years, he began. "I've served on this board. I helped revise the very covenant we're discussing. And I have to say, if our rules don't allow a veteran to display the American flag on Memorial Day, then maybe the problem isn't with Mike's interpretation. Maybe the problem is with our rules." A murmur of agreement ran through the room. Mrs. Chen spoke next. "My parents immigrated to this country with nothing. They taught me that the flag represents opportunity and freedom. Are we really saying that our property values are more important than what that symbol means?" The tide of opinion seemed to be turning. More residents stood to speak in my favor, though there were still plenty who supported the board's position. The discussion became heated at times, with Donna struggling to maintain order. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I walked to the front of the room, aware of all eyes on me. "I want to start by saying that I respect this community and its rules," I began. "I've complied with every HOA request since moving here, from the color of my mailbox to the height of my grass. I understand the value of maintaining standards. But the American flag isn't just decoration to me. It represents the country I served for 22 years and the friends I lost in that service. When I was told I couldn't display it properly, I looked for a solution that would respect both my feelings and the covenant we all agreed to. I didn't violate any rule. I read them carefully and found a way to express my patriotism within their boundaries. If the board feels that approach undermines the community's values, then I suggest the solution isn't to punish me for following the rules as written. It's to amend the rules to better reflect what this community truly values. The room was silent when I finished. Even Donna seemed momentarily at a loss for words. After a brief consultation with the other board members, she cleared her throat. Thank you, Mr. Collins. The board will now deliberate in private. We'll notify all residents of our decision by email tomorrow. As the meeting broke up, dozens of neighbors approached me with supportive comments. Some shared their own stories of HOA frustrations. Others simply wanted to shake my hand and thank me for my service. You did good, Sarah said as we drove home. Whatever they decide, you made your point with dignity. The next day, the email arrived. The board had reached a compromise position. My current display could remain until the end of the Memorial Day weekend, an additional 4 days, after which I would need to reduce it to a reasonable number of flags. Additionally, the board would form a committee to review and potentially revise the covenant sections relating to patriotic displays. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. As I read the email aloud to Sarah, I couldn't help but smile at the final paragraph. The board recognizes the importance of patriotic expression in our community and will be establishing clearer guidelines that respect both individual rights and community aesthetics. I thought the story would end there, a small neighborhood dispute resolved through reasonable compromise. I was content with the outcome and ready to move on, but the internet had other plans. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. Abby burst into our bedroom without knocking, waving her phone excitedly. "Dad, you're trending!" "I'm what?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "Your flag thing. It's everywhere online." Sarah grabbed her own phone from the nightstand and started scrolling. She's right. That local blog post got picked up by some national outlets. There's even a hashtag, HAP, Flag Guy. I sat up, now fully awake and slightly alarmed. Let me see that. The original story had indeed gone viral overnight. Someone had taken a particularly striking photo of my yard full of flags with me standing proudly in the center, and it had resonated with people across the country. The narrative had simplified in the retelling. Veteran stands up to HOA with clever flag display. By mid-morning, my phone was ringing with calls from reporters seeking interviews. A local TV news van parked at the end of our street. My email inbox filled with messages from strangers, most supportive, some critical, all passionate. What do I do with all this? I asked Sarah as we sat at our kitchen table, trying to process the sudden attention. You have two choices, she said practically. You can ignore it and hope it blows over, or you can use the platform you've been given. I thought about it. What would I even say? Whatever you think is important, she replied. You've been handed a microphone. It's up to you what to do with it. After careful consideration, I decided to do a single interview with the local TV station. I figured it would let me tell my side of the story accurately and perhaps satisfy some of the media interest. The reporter who came to our house was in her mid-30s, professional and courteous. We sat on the front porch, the sea of small flags providing a perfect backdrop. "So, Mr. Collins," she began, "what made you decide to put up 50 small American flags instead of just complying with the HOA rules?" "I did comply with the rules," I corrected her gently. "That's the whole point. I found a way to express my patriotism within the guidelines as they were written." "And why was displaying the flag so important to you?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "I served this country for over 2 decades. I've seen friends die under that flag. To me, it's not decoration, it's a symbol of sacrifice and freedom. When I was told I couldn't display it properly, it felt like more than just an aesthetic issue." The interview continued for about 15 minutes. I tried to be fair to the HOA while still making my position clear. I emphasized that the issue had been resolved amicably and that the board was now reviewing their policies. "What would you say to other homeowners who might be facing similar restrictions?" she asked as we wrapped up. "Read your covenants carefully," I advised. "Know what you agreed to. And if you want to see change, work within the system first. Sometimes the rules allow more than you might think." The segment aired that evening on the local news. By the next morning, it had been picked up by national networks. What followed was a whirlwind of unexpected attention. My inbox filled with messages from veterans sharing similar stories. Homeowners associations across the country began receiving inquiries about their flag display policies. Several state legislators announced they were considering bills to strengthen homeowners' rights to display the American flag. Our quiet suburban life had suddenly become very public. People drove by our house to take pictures. Strangers left thank you notes in our mailbox. A veterans group sent me a challenge coin in recognition of my creative stand for patriotism. The attention wasn't all positive. Some online commenters accused me of grandstanding. Others suggested I should have just followed the rules without making a scene. A few questioned my motives, suggesting I was seeking attention rather than making a principled stand. Donna Kessler was getting her share of negative attention too, portrayed in many tellings as the villain of the story, the bureaucrat who tried to prevent a veteran from flying the American flag. It wasn't entirely fair to her, and I made a point of saying so when interviewed again. She was just enforcing rules that were already in place, I explained. The issue was with the regulations, not the regulators. About a week after the story broke, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a man in his early 60s, dressed in a polo shirt and khakis, looking slightly uncomfortable as he stood on my doorstep. "Mr. Collins? My name is Robert Wilson. I'm the president of the Riverside Estates HOA in Clearwater." I invited him in, curious about why an HOA president from another town would drive to see me. "I've been following your story," he explained as we sat in the living room, "and I wanted to talk to you directly because we're currently revising our own covenant, and, well, we don't want to end up on the news for the wrong reasons." For the next hour, we had a thoughtful conversation about balancing community standards with individual rights, about the special place patriotic symbols hold in many communities, and about how HOAs can better communicate with residents. "Would you be willing to look at our draft revision?" he asked finally. "Give us your perspective as both a veteran and someone who's given this issue a lot of thought." I agreed, surprised and touched by the request. In the following weeks, I received similar outreach from several other HOA boards and even a property management company that oversaw dozens of communities. What had begun as a personal stand was evolving into something larger, a conversation about the purpose and limits of community governance, about finding balance between uniformity and individual expression. As Memorial Day weekend came to an end, I began the process of reducing my flag display as agreed. But instead of simply removing them all, I had another idea. The Tuesday after Memorial Day, I was out in the front yard at sunrise, carefully removing most of the small flags. As agreed with the HOA, I would reduce the display to a reasonable number, a deliberately vague term that we'd eventually settled on as meaning 12 flags, arranged in a simple pattern around the garden beds. As I worked, Donna Kessler's car pulled up to the curb. I straightened up, wondering if she was here to ensure compliance with our agreement. To my surprise, she approached with none of her usual officiousness. She seemed almost hesitant. "Good morning, Mr. Collins." "Good morning, Mrs. Kessler, and please call me Michael." She nodded. "Michael, I see you're removing the flags." "Most of them," I confirmed, keeping 12 as we discussed. She watched me work for a moment before speaking again. "I owe you an apology." That stopped me in my tracks. "I'm sorry?" "An apology," she repeated, meeting my eyes directly. "I've been president of this HOA for 7 years. In that time, I've come to see the covenant as almost sacred, something to be protected at all costs. I lost sight of the fact that rules should serve the community, not the other way around." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply listened. "My father was in Vietnam," she continued. "He never talked about it much, but he always flew the flag, even in our small apartment. When he died 10 years ago, that flag meant everything to me." She paused, collecting herself. "What I'm trying to say is that I understand why this matters to you, and I should have approached it differently from the beginning." "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by her unexpected vulnerability. "I appreciate that." "The committee to revise the covenant sections on patriotic displays will be meeting next week," she said, returning to a more businesslike tone. "We'd like you to be part of it, if you're willing." I nodded. "I'd be honored." As Donna left, Sarah came out with a cup of coffee for me. She'd been watching from the window. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, handing me the mug. "People can surprise you," I replied, taking a grateful sip. sometimes in good ways. Over the next few weeks, life in Oakwood Estates gradually returned to normal. The media attention faded as newer stories captured the public's interest. The traffic of curiosity seekers slowed to a trickle and eventually stopped altogether. But things weren't exactly the same as before. Neighbors who had previously only nodded politely now stopped to chat. The invisible boundaries between different sections of the community, the older residents versus the newcomers, the more conservative households versus the more progressive ones, seemed less rigid somehow. The Covenant Revision Committee met 3 times that summer. The discussions were thoughtful and surprisingly harmonious. We all recognized that we were attempting to balance competing goods, community cohesion and individual expression, aesthetic consistency and personal meaning. In the end, we drafted a new section specifically addressing patriotic displays. It allowed for permanent flagpoles up to 20 feet in height, subject to approval of location and installation quality. It permitted the display of the American flag without restriction on size, while maintaining guidelines for other types of flags. It also included provisions for special holiday displays and recognized the Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. The full HOA board approved our recommendations unanimously. When the changes were announced to the community, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. In early July, with the new rules in place, I reinstalled my original flagpole, this time with all the proper approvals. On Independence Day, we raised the flag in a small ceremony attended by many of our neighbors, including Donna Kessler. As we stood watching the flag catch the breeze for the first time in months, Mark Johnson from down the street said something that stuck with me. "You know, Mike, it's fitting that this all happened around Memorial Day. Because in a way, you reminded us what we're supposed to be remembering, not just those who served, but the principles they served for. Things like having the courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's easier to just go along." I hadn't thought of it that way, but he had a point. My small act of resistance wasn't comparable to the sacrifices made by those who gave their lives in service. But perhaps it was a way of honoring their memory by refusing to take for granted the freedoms they had protected. Later that evening, as the neighborhood gathered for an Independence Day barbecue, I found myself talking with Mrs. Abernathy, the retired school teacher who had initially disapproved of my flag garden. "I thought you were just making trouble," she admitted, watching the children play a game of tag on the community lawn. "But you made me think about something I hadn't considered in a long time." "What's that?" I asked. "That rules are made by people, for people," she said. "And sometimes they need to change as people change. I taught elementary school for 40 years, and the best classes I ever had were the ones where the children felt the rules were fair, not because they were lenient, but because they made sense." As the summer progressed, I kept 12 small flags in my garden beds as a reminder of our flag dispute. But they no longer felt like an act of defiance. Instead, they were a symbol of something unexpected that had emerged from the conflict. A stronger sense of community, built not on rigid conformity, but on respectful dialogue and shared values. Sarah found me one evening standing in the yard, looking at those small flags as the setting sun cast long shadows across them. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, slipping her arm through mine. "I was just thinking about how this all turned out so differently than I expected," I replied. "When I put up those 50 flags, I was angry. I wanted to make a point. I didn't expect to end up helping change the rules, or getting to know our neighbors better, or having conversations about what community really means." "So it was worth it?" she asked. I looked up at our full-sized flag, now properly displayed on its restored pole, then down at the small flags that had started it all. "Definitely worth it," I answered, "but not for the reasons I thought." Over a year has passed since my flag garden made headlines and changed our little corner of suburbia. The media attention is long gone, and most of Oakwood Estate's newer residents don't even know the story unless someone tells them. My original flagpole stands tall in our front yard, displaying a flag that I still raise each morning and lower each evening. The ritual connects me to my years of service, to my father and grandfather who did the same, and now to a community that came to understand why it matters to me. The 12 small flags remain in the garden beds, no longer a statement of defiance, but a reminder of unexpected growth. I've replaced them once due to weather wear, and I probably will again next spring. Donna Kessler stepped down as HOA president last month after 8 years in the role. At her farewell gathering, she mentioned our flag dispute as one of the most meaningful learning experiences of her tenure. She's still on the board, but now focuses specifically on community engagement, finding ways to build connections between neighbors beyond just enforcing rules. Our revised covenant has become something of a model for other communities. I've been invited to speak at several HOA conferences about finding balance between community standards and individual expression. It's not a role I ever expected to have, but I've come to appreciate the opportunity to share what our neighborhood learned through conflict and resolution. The most significant change, though, has been harder to quantify. There's a different feeling in Oakwood Estates now, a sense that we're not just people who happen to live near each other, but a true community with shared values and respect for our differences. We've had other disagreements since then, of course. The debate over allowing backyard chickens nearly rivaled the flag dispute in intensity. The proposed community garden location sparked weeks of heated discussion. But these conversations happen differently now, with more listening and less entrenchment, more emphasis on finding solutions everyone can live with. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the most patriotic act isn't just displaying a symbol, but engaging with your community to help it live up to the ideals that symbol represents. Democracy doesn't just happen in Washington or on battlefields abroad. It happens in community centers and front yards, in small conversations between neighbors trying to figure out how to live together. That's the story behind my flag garden. It started with frustration over a seemingly small issue, but it led to something much more significant. A reminder that the principles of freedom and respectful disagreement that our flag represents need to be practiced in our daily lives, not just celebrated on holidays. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, facing rules that seem unreasonable or restrictions that feel unjust, remember that sometimes the most effective response isn't just compliance or rebellion, but creative engagement. Read the rules carefully. Find the space within them to make your point. And be open to the possibility that what begins as a dispute might end as an opportunity for positive change. Because in the end, whether it's a homeowners association or a nation, the communities we build are only as strong as our willingness to both stand for our principles and listen to each other along the way. That's what those 50 small flags taught me, and for that lesson, I'm grateful.